I am Henry, 70 years old, and a retired commercial printer. I paid $69,000 for my daughter's wedding, only to receive a text message on the night of the rehearsal dinner telling me not to come because it was for immediate family only. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply took off my suit, sat at my computer, and canceled the $15,000 honeymoon transfer. A week later, she called me panicking from the airport in Maui because her cards were declining. I just asked her, "Didn't I tell you immediate family only?" Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe respect is earned and not inherited. Now let me tell you how a $69,000 insult cost them everything. The Windsor knot was perfectly tied. I stood in the hallway mirror of the house I had owned for 30 years, adjusting the collar of my charcoal suit. My hands were slightly calloused, the permanent result of 4 decades running heavy machinery at my commercial printing business, but they were steady. I reached for my car keys on the mahogany credenza, ready to drive downtown to the Sterling Club. My phone vibrated against the wood. A text message from my 28-year-old daughter, Natalie, illuminated the screen. The message read, "Dad, do not come to the rehearsal dinner tonight. Carter's parents booked the private room. It is immediate family only. See you at the ceremony tomorrow." I stared at the glowing letters. Immediate family only. 14 days prior, I had walked into my local bank branch and wired exactly $69,000 to the Grand Plaza Hotel. That wire covered the truffled filet mignon catering the imported floral arrangements, the live jazz band, and the open bar for 300 guests. I had paid for the stage they were standing on. I was just no longer permitted to stand on it with them. Carter's family built their wealth in commercial real estate. They viewed a retired blue-collar printer as a stain on their country club aesthetic. Natalie had clearly decided to adopt their view. I did not reply to the text. I did not call her to demand an explanation or hurl insults. Anger is a useless emotion when dealing with a parasite. I slowly loosened my tie, pulled it from my collar, and draped it over the coat rack. I walked into my home office, sat in my leather chair, and opened my laptop. I navigated to my secure banking portal and typed in my master password. The dashboard loaded, displaying my primary checking and savings accounts. I clicked on the Scheduled Transactions tab. Sitting right there in the pending queue was a $15,000 electronic transfer designated for Natalie and Carter's joint account. It was my wedding gift specifically intended to cover their 2-week luxury honeymoon at a resort in Maui. The transfer was set to clear the automated clearinghouse at midnight. I moved the cursor over the transaction. I clicked the Modify button. A drop-down menu appeared. I selected Cancel. A confirmation prompt popped up on the screen warning me that this action could not be undone. I clicked Confirm. The screen refreshed. The $15,000 instantly vanished from the pending column and reappeared in my primary available balance. I closed the laptop. The house was completely silent. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold tap water, drank it, and went to sleep at 8 o'clock. 7 days passed. The wedding had happened. I had attended the ceremony wearing that same charcoal suit. I was seated in the 3rd row behind Carter's extended family and several of his fraternity brothers. I watched Carter's father give a 20-minute toast about legacy and wealth. I ate my dinner, left the envelope containing a blank greeting card on the gift table, and drove home before they even cut the cake. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in my backyard using a pair of sharp shears to prune the dead stems off my white rose bushes. The sun was warm and the neighborhood was quiet. My cell phone rang in my chest pocket. The caller identification flashed Natalie's name. I pressed answer, activated the speakerphone, and set the device down on the glass patio table. "Dad, did you make the transfer?" Natalie's voice snapped through the speaker. She sounded frantic. The chaotic background noise of an airport terminal echoed behind her words. "Good morning, Natalie," I replied, clipping another stem. "How was the flight?" "The flight was fine, but we are standing at the check-in desk at the Four Seasons in Maui, and my card is declining." She demanded, the panic bleeding heavily into her impatience. "The concierge is looking at us like we are criminals." I checked the joint account on my app. "The 15 grand is not there." "Did you put the wrong routing number?" I set the shears down on the table. "No, I did not put any routing number." Silence stretched over the phone line, broken only by a muffled overhead announcement from the Maui airport. "What do you mean?" Natalie raised her voice. "We need that money right now to pay for the oceanfront suite." Carter maxed out his platinum cards on the groomsmen gifts and the private jet charter. "We have nothing else to swipe. I canceled the transfer last Friday." I stated, my voice completely flat and devoid of any emotion. "You canceled it!" she screamed, causing a bird to fly out of the nearby oak tree. "Why would you do that?" I leaned closer to the phone. "Didn't I tell you? My money is for immediate family only. Have a nice trip." I pressed the red button and ended the call. I did not block her number. I needed the digital trail of her upcoming actions. 52 minutes later, a specialized alert pinged on my tablet resting on the kitchen counter. It was an automated high-priority notification from Vanguard Equities. Someone had just attempted to initiate an emergency liquidation of the Natalie Sullivan Vanguard Trust. I smiled grimly. Carter and Natalie were currently stranded in a Hawaiian lobby with their luggage. Having failed to bully me into sending cash, they had immediately gone for the stock options I had established for her 30th birthday. They assumed that account was a safety net they could pillage at will. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line to my attorney, Russell. "They hit the Vanguard wall," I said the exact second the line connected. "I see the security alert on my end," Russell replied, the sharp clicking of his mechanical keyboard echoing through the receiver. The withdrawal request was automatically denied by the system. "As you instructed last week, I legally dissolved the trust on Monday morning. The tax penalties were absorbed, and the remaining assets were rolled entirely back into your primary corporate holding company. She does not own a single share. She does not have a cent to her name." "What is her next logical move?" I asked, walking out of the kitchen and heading toward the hallway staircase. "Pure desperation," Russell warned, his tone shifting to strict professionalism. "I received the private investigator's financial background check on your new son-in-law this morning. Carter's family might have money, but Carter himself is drowning. He is severely leveraged. The investigator found a massive trail of defaults. The secondary borrower on Natalie's luxury auto loan is you. If Carter is truly as broke as this report indicates, they are not going to just ask for cash anymore. They are going to come after your hard assets to liquidate them. I need you to secure the physical deeds to your properties right now." "They are already locked in the floor safe," I confirmed. A rapid barrage of text messages began vibrating my phone against my palm. I glanced at the screen. "Pick up the phone right now. You cannot do this to us. We are sleeping in the airport terminal. Carter is furious. Turn the trust fund back on immediately." I ignored the messages. I walked to the hall closet, reached up to the top shelf, and pulled down 2 large hard-shell suitcases. I dragged them across the hardwood floor and hauled them up the stairs to the bedroom Natalie had abandoned 3 years ago. The room was still filled with her designer clothes, her expensive shoes, and her college memorabilia. I opened the suitcases on the carpet. I did not neatly fold anything. I began pulling her silk dresses off the wooden hangers, tossing them unceremoniously into the luggage. I dumped her jewelry boxes and cosmetics right on top. The battle was not happening in a tropical paradise anymore. It was coming directly to my front door, and I was clearing the battlefield before they even landed. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursday when the rideshare vehicle pulled into my driveway. The car was a battered economy sedan, a stark contrast to the luxury black town cars Carter usually insisted upon booking for their travel. I stood perfectly still behind the sheer curtains of my living room window, watching them step out into the oppressive afternoon heat. Natalie looked entirely disheveled and completely exhausted. Her expensive designer vacation outfit was deeply wrinkled from spending 14 hours flying on standby in the middle seat of an economy cabin. Carter slammed the trunk of the car shut with excessive force. His posture was rigid with barely contained anger. The sunburn on his neck was bright red, highlighting the aggressive and erratic way he marched up my paved walkway. They did not look like happy newlyweds returning from a romantic getaway. They looked like desperate predators who had just been cornered and starved. I did not move from the window. I watched silently as Natalie reached into her leather handbag and pulled out her heavy silver keyring. She marched up the 3 brick steps to the front porch, shoved her brass key into the deadbolt of the front door, and tried to turn it. The mechanism did not budge a single millimeter. She frowned in confusion, pulled the key out, wiped the metal on her skirt, and tried again. She jiggled the heavy door handle violently. It remained completely frozen in place. Carter pushed her aside roughly. He grabbed the heavy brass doorknob and twisted it with all his body weight, expecting the wood to yield to his frustration. The door stood absolutely firm. I had paid a private security contractor $700 on Wednesday morning to completely replace the hardware. He had installed reinforced biometric locks on every single entry point of the entire property. The old brass keys Natalie held were now entirely useless pieces of scrap metal. "Open the door right now!" Carter shouted, pounding his closed fist heavily against the solid oak wood. "We know you are in there. Your truck is parked in the garage. Open the damn door before I break a window." I took a slow and deliberate breath, smoothing the front of my shirt to remove any imaginary wrinkles. I walked into the foyer, grabbed the handles of the 2 large suitcases I had packed the day before, and dragged them toward the entrance. I unlatched the heavy deadbolt from the inside using my thumbprint. The loud electronic click echoed across the quiet porch. Carter stepped back immediately, a smug and arrogant expression instantly replacing his blinding rage. He truly thought he had won the encounter. He genuinely believed that his loud pounding and aggressive shouting had intimidated me into submission. He adjusted the collar of his polo shirt, expecting me to offer a pathetic apology, and opened the door wide. I pulled the heavy oak door open, but I kept the reinforced steel security screen firmly locked between us. I did not invite them inside. I stood in the entryway looking directly into Carter's bloodshot and frantic eyes. "Where is the combination to the floor safe?" Carter demanded, entirely skipping any form of basic greeting. His voice was low, demanding, and heavily laced with threat. "Your attorney locked us out of the trust fund yesterday, and the bank is refusing to issue a temporary credit line because you flagged our accounts for fraud. We need cash right now to cover our return travel expenses and the vendor penalties from the wedding. Open the safe and give us what we are owed." I slowly shifted my gaze to look at Natalie. She was standing slightly behind her new husband, her arms tightly crossed over her chest, nodding in agreement with his aggressive demands. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not express a single ounce of remorse or apologize for her cruel behavior at the rehearsal dinner. She was simply standing there waiting for the massive financial payout she firmly believed she was entitled to receive. I reached down to the floor and pushed the first heavy suitcase through the small gap I allowed in the doorway, forcing it out onto the porch. Then I pushed the second piece of luggage right next to it. They landed with a heavy and final thud against the red brick floor, stopping right at Natalie's feet. "What is this?" Natalie asked, staring down at the matching designer luggage sets in utter confusion. "That is everything you left behind." "In your childhood bedroom," I stated calmly. keeping my voice completely level and steady. Every single designer dress, every pair of expensive shoes, every electronic device, and every piece of jewelry I ever bought for you over the last decade. It is all packed right there in those bags. You can take them to a pawn shop and sell the jewelry to pay for your outstanding travel expenses. You no longer have a bedroom inside this house. Natalie's mouth dropped open in pure shock. You packed all my things, she stammered, taking a hesitant step toward the locked screen door. You are kicking me out of my own family home over a stupid misunderstanding about a hotel bill. You are acting completely insane. It is not a misunderstanding, I replied, my voice devoid of any parental warmth or hesitation. You demanded that I respect your new family boundaries. You made it explicitly clear in front of Carter's parents that my role was strictly to fund your luxurious lifestyle while remaining entirely invisible. I am simply agreeing to your newly established terms. I am no longer funding your existence, and you are no longer welcome on my personal property. Carter kicked the side of the closest suitcase violently. The expensive nylon fabric tore slightly against the rough brick edge. Stop playing these pathetic games with us, old man, he sneered, pointing a finger directly at my face through the metal security mesh. You do not want to do this today. I know exactly how much untraceable cash you keep in that floor safe in the basement. You are going to let me inside this house right now, or I am going to call the local police and tell them you are illegally holding our personal property hostage. Call them. I challenged, not breaking eye contact with him for a single second. Call the police right now, Carter. Let us invite law enforcement to stand on my front porch today. While we wait for the patrol cars to arrive with their sirens blaring, we can openly discuss exactly why you are so desperate for that untraceable cash. Carter froze completely. The aggressive posture vanished from his shoulders in an instant. His hand hovered nervously over his front pocket where his phone was kept, but he did not reach inside to grab it. His breathing became noticeably shallow. Natalie looked completely confused by the sudden shift in tension. She turned to her husband, her brow furrowed. Just call them, Carter, she urged him. He cannot legally lock us out of the house without a formal written eviction notice. Call the police and make him open the door so we can get the money. Carter swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He looked away from my piercing gaze and stared down at the cracked concrete driveway. He remained completely silent. He did not pull out his phone. He did not say another word about calling the authorities. I watched the cold realization slowly wash over Natalie's face. She looked from Carter's defeated posture back up to my stoic expression. The righteous anger in her eyes was slowly being replaced by a creeping, suffocating sense of dread. She was just beginning to realize that the confident, wealthy man she had married was entirely terrified of what I might say next to the police. Take your bags and leave my property immediately, I ordered, my voice cutting through the heavy afternoon humidity like a sharpened blade. If you ever step foot on this porch again, I will have you both arrested and prosecuted for criminal trespassing. I did not wait to hear their pathetic excuses or their hollow protests. I firmly closed the heavy oak door in their faces. I locked the biometric deadbolt, turned my back to the entrance, and walked calmly back into my quiet, empty house. The real war was just beginning, and they had absolutely no idea that I was already holding all the ammunition. The heavy oak door had barely clicked shut when the dull thud of a heavy object striking the wood echoed through the foyer. Carter was not retreating. He was escalating. Through the reinforced glass of the sidelight window, I watched him grab the heavy iron porch chair. He lifted it above his head, his face contorted in a mask of violent rage, aiming directly for the large bay window of my living room. He screamed that he was going to tear my house apart brick by brick until I gave him the combination to the floor safe. He shouted that I owed him that money, and he would take it by force if necessary. I did not run to the telephone to call the police. I did not flinch or cower in the hallway. I calmly reached into the inside pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out a thick manila folder. I unlatched the biometric deadbolt and pulled the oak door open just as Carter was preparing to hurl the iron chair through the glass. He froze mid-swing, completely surprised by my sudden reappearance. He foolishly assumed my return signaled total surrender. He lowered the heavy chair slightly, a victorious and arrogant sneer spreading across his sunburned face. He demanded the safe combination again, extending his empty hand toward me like a petulant child demanding a toy. "Put the chair down and pick this up," I instructed evenly, dropping the manila envelope onto the welcome mat between us. It landed with a heavy slap against the concrete. Carter laughed, a harsh and grating sound, entirely convinced the envelope contained the emergency cash he had been demanding. He dropped the iron chair, letting it clatter loudly against the red bricks. He snatched the envelope from the ground and ripped open the metal clasp with frantic greed. His triumphant sneer vanished the exact second his eyes processed the first printed page. It was not a stack of $100 bills. It was a highly detailed forensic ledger. The private investigator my attorney hired did not just look at Carter's public credit cards. He dug deep into the encrypted digital servers of 3 illegal offshore sportsbooks operating out of Costa Rica. The document shaking in Carter's hands was a comprehensive summary of his catastrophic gambling addiction. Over the past 24 months, he had accumulated exactly $180,000 in underground debt. He had bet on everything from college football to international horse racing, and he had lost every single time. Carter stopped breathing. All the aggressive color drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. He flipped to the second page, which contained high-resolution surveillance photographs. The images showed him meeting with 2 known collection enforcers outside a downtown dive bar just 3 weeks before the wedding. He owed very dangerous people a massive amount of money, and his leniency period had completely expired the day he put a wedding ring on my daughter's finger. Natalie peered over his shoulder, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. She reached out and snatched the second page from his hands before he could fold it away. Her eyes quickly scanned the highlighted numbers at the bottom of the ledger. $180,000. She read the figure out loud, her voice trembling with rising panic. She looked at the man she had promised to love and cherish just 1 week ago. She asked him what these documents meant, and who those terrifying men in the photographs were. Carter could not even look her in the eye. He stared blankly at his expensive Italian leather shoes, his hands trembling uncontrollably by his sides. "Let me explain it to you, Natalie," I said, leaning casually against the wooden doorframe. "Your new husband does not love you. He never did. He scouted you like a financial target. He researched my background and found out your father owned a highly profitable commercial printing company and multiple debt-free real estate properties. He married you purely because he assumed my wealth would automatically become his wealth. He desperately needed a permanent bailout to stop those violent men in the photographs from breaking his legs. I was supposed to be his unsuspecting piggy bank. The extravagant $69,000 wedding was just a temporary investment to secure the ultimate prize, which was my retirement fund." I watched the devastating truth settle over Natalie. I explained exactly why Carter had banned me from the rehearsal dinner. "He told you his family wanted a private, intimate gathering," I continued. "The truth is, his parents legally disowned him 2 years ago after he stole from his mother's pension to cover his gambling losses. The people sitting in that private room at the Sterling Club were distant cousins and business associates who had no idea about his criminal debts. Carter banned me from the dinner because he was terrified I might start a conversation with his relatives and uncover his massive web of lies." Natalie stumbled backward, as if she had been physically struck by a heavy blow. She looked at Carter, begging him to call me a liar. She pleaded with him to say the documents were fake and the photographs were manipulated. Carter remained absolutely silent. His cowardly silence was the loudest confession she could ever hear. The luxurious, wealthy life she thought she was entering was entirely fabricated from the very beginning. She had not married a successful heir to a prestigious real estate empire. She had married a desperate, degenerate gambler who was actively using her as a human shield against violent underground creditors. "You planned this," Carter suddenly whispered, his voice cracking with genuine terror. He finally looked up at me, his eyes wide with panic. "You knew about this massive debt before the wedding ceremony. You let me marry her just so you could pull the rug out from under me when I had absolutely no escape route left." "I do not make reckless financial investments," I replied coldly, staring directly into his panicked eyes. "I found out about your offshore accounts the day I paid for the wedding venue. I could have stopped the ceremony right then. But if I had simply warned Natalie, she would have called me a hellish, controlling old man, trying to ruin her perfect happiness. She would have eloped with you anyway, just to prove me wrong. I needed her to see your true parasitic nature. I needed her to experience the exact moment your charming mask slipped and shattered. That moment is right now." The brutal reality of his situation crashed down on Carter. With the Vanguard Trust Fund legally dissolved and my personal assets locked securely behind impenetrable legal walls, he had absolutely zero access to capital. The violent men he owed money to knew he had just married into a wealthy family. They were undoubtedly expecting their full payment by the end of the month. Carter was officially out of time, out of money, and completely out of leverage. And worst of all, Natalie suddenly realized that by signing that marriage certificate, she was now legally tied to his catastrophic financial ruin. I stepped back inside my house and prepared to close the heavy door for the final time. "You two have a lot of serious financial matters to discuss," I said quietly. "I strongly suggest you move quickly. The men in those surveillance photographs do not send polite text messages when they want to collect their money. They show up unannounced, and they carry weapons. And since you no longer have a physical key to my secure house, you will have to deal with them out here on the open street." I firmly shut the door, locking the deadbolt, and leaving them standing completely alone on the front porch with their luggage and their totally ruined lives. I walked into the kitchen and sat at the island counter, watching the live feed from my front porch security cameras on my tablet. The heavy oak door was firmly locked, but the high-definition audio captured every single word spoken outside. Natalie had collapsed onto one of her designer suitcases, her face buried in her hands. Carter was pacing back and forth across the brick walkway, violently kicking the manicured bushes lining the steps. He looked like a trapped animal, desperately searching for an exit that did not exist. My cell phone vibrated on the marble countertop. The caller identification displayed Natalie's name. I let it ring 3 times before I swiped the screen and accepted the call. I did not say a word. I simply listened to her erratic, heavy breathing through the receiver. "Dad, you have to help us," Natalie pleaded, her voice cracking with raw desperation. Her tone had completely shifted from entitled arrogance to pure begging. "I know he lied to me. I know the wedding was a mistake, but those men are going to kill him. You saw the photographs in the folder. They are real criminals. You have to cash out your retirement fund. If you wire the $180,000 directly to his account today, we can pay them off and make this entire nightmare go away. I promise we will pay you back every single cent." I stared at the security feed, watching her press the phone tightly to her ear. The absolute audacity of her request was staggering. She had just discovered her new husband was a degenerate gambler who used her as a financial shield. Instead of running away from him, she was demanding that I set fire to 40 years of my own hard labor to rescue him from his own criminal mistakes. I poured myself another glass of water and took a slow sip. "You want me to liquidate my retirement portfolio?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You want me to take the money I saved from working 60-hour weeks at a printing press, inhaling chemical fumes, and standing on concrete floors just to hand it over to illegal sports bookies in Costa Rica? You want me to completely bankrupt my future to pay for the bad bets of a man who banned me from his rehearsal dinner?" "He is my husband," Natalie sobbed, her voice echoing through the phone and the security monitor simultaneously. "I legally married him. We are tied together. If they come after him, they are going to come after me too. You cannot just abandon your only daughter to violent loan sharks. You have the money sitting in your investment accounts. It is just sitting there doing nothing. Please just transfer the funds and save my life." "Your life is not in danger," I replied coldly. "My attorney already reviewed your legal standing. The gambling debts were incurred entirely before the marriage certificate was signed. You are not legally responsible for a single dollar of his offshore criminal liabilities. You can walk away right now. You can take your suitcases, call a taxi, and file for an immediate annulment based on financial fraud. If you leave him on that porch, you are completely safe. But if you choose to stay with him, you are choosing his debts. I will never give Carter a single dime of my money." I continued, the absolute finality ringing clearly in my tone. "I am not a rescue fund for a degenerate gambler. I am not paying off his bookies. My answer is absolutely not. Do not ask me again." I did not hang up the phone. I kept the line open and watched the security tablet. Natalie slowly lowered the phone from her ear. The tears streaming down her face were genuine, now born of total hopelessness. Carter stopped pacing and marched directly toward her. His face was twisted in a mixture of panic and deep resentment. "What did he say?" Carter demanded, his voice sharp and aggressive. "Tell me he is wiring the money right now. Tell me the old man is bailing us out." Natalie looked up at him, her eyes completely hollow. She shook her head slowly. "He said no. He said he will not pay your bookies. He told me to file for an annulment and leave you here." The thin veneer of Carter's charming country club persona instantly disintegrated. The wealthy, loving husband vanished entirely, replaced by a vicious and cornered street hustler. He did not comfort his crying wife. He did not apologize for dragging her into a massive criminal debt. He leaned down and pointed a shaking finger directly in her face. "You are completely useless," Carter spat, the venom dripping from every single word. "You had one job, Natalie. You had one simple job. You were supposed to manage the old man. You told me he would do anything for you. You told me he was soft and easily manipulated. I married you because you were supposed to be the golden ticket to clear my board. You totally messed up the bag." Natalie recoiled as if she had been slapped. Her mouth opened in silent shock. She stared at the man she had promised to love unconditionally, realizing he viewed her merely as a failed transaction. "You are blaming me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the security feed. "I did not place those bets, Carter. I did not borrow money from the mob. You lied to me about everything." "Of course I lied to you," Carter yelled, throwing his arms up in the air in pure frustration. "Look at you. You have absolutely nothing to offer me except his bank accounts. The trust fund is gone. The honeymoon cash is gone. You could not even secure the combination to the floor safe. I am completely dead because you could not control your own father. If I do not have that money by the end of the week, they are going to break my legs, and I am going to make sure they know exactly where you sleep too." Carter did not wait for her to respond. He turned his back on her, marched down the driveway, and began walking rapidly down the street, leaving her entirely alone on the concrete with her packed luggage. He was abandoning her the exact second her financial utility expired. Natalie sat frozen on the designer suitcase. She hugged her knees to her chest and began to sob uncontrollably. The luxurious future she had envisioned had evaporated in less than 24 hours. She had alienated the only person who had ever truly protected her, and she had sacrificed everything for a man who despised her. I watched her cry for a few minutes on the glowing screen of my tablet. I felt a sharp pang of paternal sadness, but I ruthlessly pushed it away. Pity was exactly what Carter had relied upon to execute his scam. I reached out and ended the active phone call, disconnecting the line. I turned off the security monitor. The alliance between the newlyweds was completely shattered, but a cornered parasite does not just disappear. They would become desperate, and desperation always breeds terrible mistakes. I walked into my home office and began reviewing the security protocols on my property deeds, knowing exactly what their next illegal move would be. I sat in the quiet solitude of my home office with the heavy mahogany door closed tightly against the rest of the empty house. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across my desk, where the physical deeds to my 3 properties were laid out in a neat row. I had just finished securing the digital perimeter of my financial life when my private line began to ring. It was a secure number known only to my legal counsel and my primary financial institutions. I glanced at the caller identification display. The screen showed the name of my senior loan officer, Matthew, from First Horizon National Bank. Matthew and I had done business together for over 20 years. He was the man who had structured the original commercial loans for my printing press business decades ago. He was not a man who called my private line outside of normal business hours unless something was terribly wrong. I picked up the receiver and answered the call with a simple greeting. Matthew did not exchange any pleasantries. His voice was incredibly tense and filled with a deep professional hesitation. He asked me if I was currently sitting down and if I was in a secure location where nobody could overhear our conversation. I told him I was completely alone and instructed him to speak clearly. Matthew took a heavy breath through the phone. He informed me that exactly 45 minutes ago, a loan application had been submitted to his branch marked for expedited processing. The application was for a second mortgage on my summer cabin located up near Lake Oconee. It was a property I had purchased entirely with cash 15 years ago, and it held absolutely zero debt. The requested loan amount on the application was exactly $180,000. It was the exact amount Carter owed to his violent offshore creditors. I did not interrupt Matthew. I let him continue speaking as the pieces of Natalie's desperate plan fell perfectly into place. Having failed to extract the money from my retirement accounts, and having been locked out of the investment trust, she had moved to her absolute last resort. She knew about the lake cabin. She had spent every summer of her teenage years swimming off that dock. She knew I kept the physical deed completely unencumbered, and she knew exactly which bank held my property portfolios. Matthew explained that the application had been submitted electronically through the bank's external portal, but it required a physical signature authorization form to be uploaded alongside it. He told me that a scanned copy of a notarized authorization had been attached to the file. The document granted my daughter Natalie full limited power of attorney to borrow against the Lake Oconee property on my behalf. "There is only one problem," Henry Matthew said, his voice dropping to a low whisper. "The signature on the power of attorney document is an incredibly good copy of your handwriting, but it was authorized by a public notary whose license expired 3 years ago. Furthermore, the digital internet protocol address attached to the submission originated from a public coffee shop located just 3 blocks away from your primary residence. I paused the processing immediately because I know you would never leverage a debt-free asset to pull cash out on a Thursday afternoon without calling me first." Matthew waited for me to speak. I knew exactly what he was expecting. He was expecting me to sigh heavily and tell him it was just a massive family misunderstanding. He was waiting for me to tell him to quietly cancel the application and sweep the entire embarrassing incident under the rug to protect my daughter from any criminal liability. In the banking world, wealthy families cover up the financial crimes of their entitled children every single day to avoid public scandal. Natalie was entirely banking on that exact parental instinct. She assumed that even if she was caught, I would quietly absorb the damage rather than see her face the authorities. She was completely wrong. Cancel the application, I instructed, my voice remaining as cold and hard as the granite countertops in my kitchen. Do not process the loan. I heard Matthew exhale a deep sigh of relief on the other end of the line. I will delete the file right now, Henry, he replied, sounding glad to have avoided a messy situation. I will just flag it as a duplicate or an administrative error, and we can pretend this never happened. You should probably have a serious talk with your daughter, though. Do not delete the file, I commanded sharply, stopping him in his tracks. You are going to do exactly the opposite, Matthew. I want you to freeze the application in its current state. I want you to package the electronic submission data, the forged power of attorney document, and the time-stamped internet protocol logs. You are going to send all of that evidence directly to the primary fraud investigation unit of your bank, and you are going to copy my attorney Russell on the email immediately. The line went dead silent for several seconds. Henry Matthew finally stammered, his professional composure completely shattering. If I submit this to the fraud department, it automatically becomes a federal banking issue. They will involve the authorities. Your daughter forged a legal document to attempt a wire fraud of nearly $200,000. That is a major felony. If I push this button, she is going to face severe criminal charges. She could go to prison. I am entirely aware of the legal definitions of felony fraud. Matthew, I replied, staring down at the real, unblemished deed to the lake cabin resting on my desk. My daughter made a conscious decision to walk into a public coffee shop, connect to an untraceable internet network, and forge my signature to steal my property. She did this to pay off the gambling debts of a man who married her for money. She did not ask for my help. She attempted to rob me blind. I took a slow breath, letting the absolute reality of my decision settle over the conversation. If a stranger on the street stole my identity and tried to mortgage my house, we would not hesitate to prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. Natalie is no longer acting as my daughter. She is acting as a hostile financial threat. You will flag the application as a confirmed felony fraud, and you will initiate the criminal protocol right now. I understand, Matthew said, his voice barely above a whisper. I will process the fraud alert immediately. The federal investigators will likely contact you by tomorrow morning to formally verify that you did not authorize the signature on the application. I will be ready for their call, I assured him. Thank you for your diligence, Matthew. I ended the call and placed the phone back on the desk. The silence in the office felt different now. It was no longer just the quiet of an empty house. It was the calm before a massive legal storm. Natalie had thought she was being incredibly clever by using a forged document to bypass my security measures. She thought her status as my only child gave her an invisible shield of immunity against the consequences of her actions. She had completely underestimated my resolve. I was not going to play defense anymore. By submitting that forged application, she had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy her fraudulent marriage and completely dismantle Carter's predatory scheme. They wanted to play a dangerous game with high stakes and real money. I was simply going to let the federal government be the referee. I opened a new encrypted folder on my computer screen labeled Evidence and prepared to receive the bank files. The trap was fully set, and Natalie had walked right into it without ever looking down. I parked my truck in the underground garage of the downtown legal district at exactly 8 o'clock on Friday morning. The federal banking authorities already possessed the forged mortgage documents, but I was not interested in waiting for the incredibly slow wheels of the justice system to crush my daughter. I wanted to accelerate the timeline. I rode the elevator to the 42nd floor and walked directly into the glass-enclosed conference room where my attorney Russell was already waiting. He had a thick stack of printed financial ledgers and a fresh pot of black coffee sitting on the long mahogany table. Russell looked up from his tablet and informed me that the bank fraud investigators had officially referred the forged mortgage application to the federal authorities. He said Natalie would likely receive a formal visit from federal agents by early next week. He suggested we sit back, relax, and let the criminal justice system handle the heavy lifting. I poured myself a cup of the bitter coffee and shook my head. I told him that federal investigations take months to yield a formal indictment. Carter and Natalie were completely desperate right now, and desperate people always find a destructive way to survive. I wanted to completely suffocate their financial oxygen before noon today. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of heavy stock paper. I slid it across the polished table toward Russell. He picked it up and adjusted his reading glasses. It was the original vendor contract from the Grand Plaza Hotel detailing the $69,000 payment due for the wedding catering and venue. Russell looked confused. He reminded me that the wedding was already over and the vendors had been paid in full months ago. He stated there was absolutely no legal way to claw back money from a hotel that had already rendered its services to the public. I leaned back in my chair and explained that I did not want to sue the hotel. I wanted to sue Carter and Natalie. I told Russell to look very closely at the second page of the document under the designated corporate payer section. When Carter first proposed to my daughter, I had immediately suspected he was a massive financial liability. Because of that suspicion, I had absolutely refused to write Natalie a personal check. Instead, I paid all the wedding vendors directly from the accounts of my printing business. I had the hotel draft the contract listing Sullivan Commercial Printing as the official sponsor of a private corporate event. I pointed to a specific paragraph near the bottom of the page. Before I agreed to wire that massive sum of money, I had insisted that the hotel include a strict condition of funding clause. The clause explicitly stated that the funds were being provided under the absolute condition of full sponsor inclusion in all official event scheduling. It was a standard corporate clause I had used in my commercial printing contracts for 4 decades, designed to ensure that if my company sponsored a local event, we received full access and recognition. I had simply repurposed my old cutthroat business tactics to protect my personal wealth. Russell read the commercial clause out loud, his eyes widening in sudden realization. He looked up at me with a sharp, predatory smile. By sending that text message explicitly banning me from the rehearsal dinner, Natalie had not just insulted her father. She had officially and documentedly excluded the primary corporate sponsor from a scheduled event. She had breached a commercial contract. I told Russell that because the explicit condition of the funding was violated, the $69,000 legally ceased to be a wedding gift the exact second I received her text message. It retroactively became an unapproved commercial loan. And since they had already consumed the luxury hotel services without meeting the contractual conditions they were currently in, default of a massive corporate debt owed directly to my holding company. Russell set the paper down and began typing rapidly on his laptop. He explained that if we reclassified the wedding payment as a defaulted commercial business loan rather than a personal family dispute, we did not have to wait for a long civil trial to inflict severe financial damage. Commercial debt collection is far more ruthless than family court. He said we could file an immediate emergency mechanics lien against their marital estate to secure the outstanding corporate debt. I asked him what hard assets they actually had left to place a lien against. Carter was drowning in offshore gambling debt, and Natalie had just been locked out of her Vanguard trust fund. Russell pulled up their public financial records on the large digital screen on the conference room wall. He pointed to 2 recent vehicle registrations. Just 3 weeks before the wedding, operating under the delusional arrogance of their impending wealth, Carter and Natalie had financed 2 brand-new luxury sports utility vehicles. They had put down the absolute minimum cash deposit and financed the remaining $140,000. Russell explained this trap perfectly. He said that if we filed the commercial civil lawsuit for the $69,000 breach of contract this morning, we could simultaneously file an emergency petition to attach a commercial lien directly to those 2 vehicles. Once the lien was officially recorded by the county clerk, it would trigger a mandatory default clause hidden deep in their auto loan agreements. The dealership's financing company would instantly receive an automated alert that the cars were suddenly collateral in a massive corporate lawsuit. To protect their own assets, the auto lender would immediately cancel the financing and demand the full balance of the vehicles within 24 hours. "Execute the filing," I commanded, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "I want the commercial lawsuit filed in the county courthouse before they even wake up from their hotel beds today. I want the heavy liens attached to those luxury vehicles, and I want you to personally notify their auto lender that the cars are now subject to a corporate asset seizure." Russell did not hesitate for a single second. The rapid clicking of his mechanical keyboard was the only sound in the glass room for the next 20 minutes. He drafted the emergency commercial complaint outlining the breach of the vendor contract and the exact timeline of the rehearsal dinner exclusion. He compiled the text message Natalie had sent me, attaching it as Exhibit A to prove the breach was intentional. He then drafted the aggressive financial liens targeting their only remaining assets. With a final and decisive keystroke, he submitted the entire legal package electronically to the county clerk's office. "It is completely done," Russell announced, closing his laptop and taking his reading glasses off. "The commercial civil suit is officially on the public record. The auto lender will receive the automated lien notification within the next hour. By lunchtime today, Carter and Natalie will not just be entirely broke and under active federal investigation for mortgage fraud. They will have aggressive corporate repossession agents actively hunting for their luxury cars." I stood up, buttoned my suit jacket, and picked up my empty coffee cup. I did not feel any sense of guilt or parental hesitation. My daughter had viewed me as nothing more than a disposable automatic teller machine, and her new husband had viewed me as a foolish mark to be actively exploited. They had tried to steal my debt-free home to pay off illegal sports bookies. I was simply teaching them the brutal and unforgiving reality of high-stakes commercial accounting. I thanked Russell for his prompt and ruthless legal work and walked out of the glass office. The trap had not just snapped shut. The concrete walls were now actively closing in on them, and they had absolutely nowhere left to hide. The doorbell chimed with a sharp and demanding rhythm at precisely 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. I was sitting in my leather armchair, enjoying the quiet solitude of my living room, when the security tablet chimed on the coffee table. I picked up the device and looked at the high-definition camera feed. A silver Bentley was parked diagonally across my driveway, entirely blocking my garage. My ex-wife Joanne stepped out of the passenger side. She was wearing a tailored white pantsuit, an oversized pair of designer sunglasses, and a diamond necklace that caught the afternoon sunlight. Behind her, emerging from the driver's seat, was Wallace, her new husband. Wallace was a retired investment banker who had inherited a massive commercial shipping fortune. He walked up my paved walkway with the heavy, arrogant stride of a man who firmly believed his immense wealth could effortlessly solve any problem in the world. I walked to the foyer and unlatched the heavy deadbolt. I pulled the door open and stood firmly in the threshold. Joanne did not even bother to offer a basic greeting. She pushed forcefully past my shoulder and marched directly into my hallway, her expensive floral perfume instantly suffocating the air. Wallace followed closely behind her, offering me a slow, condescending nod. He stood next to my wooden coat rack, looking around my modest home with a thinly veiled expression of complete disgust. "Have you entirely lost your mind, Henry?" Joanne screamed, turning sharply to face me. Federal agents arrived at the hotel in Maui this morning. They knocked on Natalie's door, confiscated her laptop, and seized her cell phone. They officially informed her she is the primary suspect in a federal wire fraud investigation, and she is not allowed to leave the state. You need to pick up your phone right now and call the banking authorities. You are going to tell them it was a massive familial misunderstanding. You are not going to ruin our daughter's entire future over a stupid piece of paper. I closed the front door slowly, securing the lock behind them. I did not look at Joanne. I shifted my gaze entirely to Wallace. He reached into the inside pocket of his tailored Italian suit jacket and pulled out a silver fountain pen and a leather-bound checkbook. "Listen to me, Henry Wallace," said his voice dripping with absolute arrogance. Joanne explained the situation to me on the drive over. "I understand you feel slighted by the rehearsal dinner exclusion. I understand you are upset about the wedding expenses. I am fully prepared to write you a personal check right now for the entire $69,000. You can deposit the funds today, and you will be made completely whole. In exchange, you are going to call the federal investigators and drop this ridiculous and petty allegation immediately. We are absolutely not going to let a minor family argument destroy our pristine public reputation in this city." I stared at the expensive leather checkbook resting in his manicured hands. I did not reach out to take it. I simply smiled a cold and empty smile. I walked past them, leaving them standing awkwardly in the hallway, and went into my home office. I returned a few moments later carrying a thick blue folder. I walked directly up to Wallace and handed the folder to him, completely ignoring my ex-wife. I told him to put his checkbook away because he was actually already paying for the wedding, whether he realized it or not. Wallace frowned, his thick eyebrows knitting together in confusion, but he accepted the blue folder. Joanne crossed her arms, looking highly annoyed but not yet panicked. She clearly assumed I was handing him legal documents regarding the commercial mechanics lien I had placed on the luxury vehicles. She had absolutely no idea what my attorney had uncovered during his relentless forensic dive into Carter's background. "What exactly is this?" Wallace asked, staring intently at the first printed page. "These are my private banking statements from my offshore trust account. How did you possibly obtain these highly confidential records?" I kept my voice perfectly level and told him my legal counsel is extremely thorough when tracking the flow of stolen money. I instructed Wallace to look very closely at the highlighted electronic wire transfers from the past 4 months. I told him to pay special attention to the exact dates and the receiving routing numbers. Wallace adjusted his reading glasses and read the lines out loud. He noted 3 separate wire transfers, each for exactly $25,000, sent to an anonymous shell company registered in Delaware. He looked over at Joanne, his forehead wrinkling in deep confusion. He asked her if she recognized the corporate entity because she was the only other living person who held authorization credentials for that specific offshore trust account. Joanne suddenly turned the color of chalk. The entitled and arrogant posture completely vanished from her shoulders in an instant. She took a frantic step toward Wallace, reaching her trembling hand out to take the folder away from him. She stammered that it was just a private real estate investment she had made for her independent retirement portfolio, and she accused me of illegally invading their financial privacy. "Do not let her touch that folder," I warned Wallace, my voice suddenly sharp and commanding, echoing loudly in the enclosed space. "Turn to the second page right now. Look at the corporate registration documentation for that Delaware shell company." Wallace immediately flipped the page. His eyes rapidly scanned the dense legal text. The officially registered owner of the shell company was Carter. Wallace stopped breathing for a full second. The silence in the foyer became absolute and suffocating. "Let me explain exactly what happened in your own house, Wallace," I said, pacing slowly across the hardwood floor. 2 months before the wedding ceremony, Carter confessed to Natalie that his illegal sports bookies were threatening to cause physical harm. He needed $75,000 immediately to keep the debt collectors away from the reception venue. Natalie knew I would never give a degenerate criminal a single dime, so she went crying directly to her mother. Joanne was completely terrified that the luxurious wedding would be abruptly canceled. She had already invited all of her high society friends, and she simply could not bear the public humiliation of a failed event. But Joanne does not have any independent wealth. She only has access to your wealth. Wallace slowly lowered the blue folder. He looked at Joanne, his face turning a dangerous and volatile shade of crimson. "You systematically stole $75,000 from my private trust account," he whispered, his voice shaking with absolute and terrifying fury. "You funneled my personal money to a criminal gambler just to save face at the local country club." Joanne began to sob uncontrollably. She pressed her hands to her face and told Wallace she was planning to pay him back eventually. She claimed she was just borrowing the funds temporarily to protect their daughter from a scandal. She begged him on her knees to understand that a public embarrassment would have ruined their elite social standing forever. "You compromised my entire financial infrastructure to protect a street hustler," Wallace yelled, throwing the heavy blue folder directly at her chest. The printed banking statements scattered violently across the hardwood floor. "You deliberately forged my authorization on those wire transfers, just like your daughter forged the mortgage application on this house. You two are exactly the same kind of parasite. You are nothing but common thieves disguised in expensive jewelry." Wallace turned back to me, his expression completely transformed. He was no longer looking at me with the condescension of a wealthy superior. He was looking at me with the deep, profound respect of a man who suddenly realized I had just surgically removed a massive financial tumor from his life. He told me to keep the federal fraud charges completely active against Natalie. He stated he was going to contact his own team of ruthless corporate lawyers immediately and file severe criminal embezzlement charges against Joanne. He walked over to his weeping wife and demanded the keys to the silver Bentley. Joanne wailed loudly, pleading with him to go back to their mansion and talk about the situation privately. Wallace ignored her tears completely. He grabbed her expensive designer handbag, unzipped the main compartment, and pulled the heavy key fob out himself. He looked down at her and coldly informed her that she no longer had a mansion to return to. He instructed her to call a local taxi company and strongly advised her to find a very capable defense attorney because he was going to legally freeze every single joint account they shared before he even drove off my street. Wallace opened my front door, stepped out into the afternoon heat, and walked down the driveway without looking back a single time. Joanne collapsed completely onto the floor of my foyer, sobbing hysterically amidst the scattered pages of her own financial ruin. She looked up at me, her makeup running down her face, begging me for help. She asked me how I could destroy her perfect life so easily and so callously. I looked down at the woman who had made my existence miserable for 2 decades. I told her I did not destroy anything at all. I simply provided the undeniable truth, and the truth is the absolute most destructive weapon in the world when it is deployed against chronic liars. I opened the front door wider, pointing toward the street. I told her the taxi company phone number was listed on the internet and demanded she leave my property immediately before I called the local police to report an unwanted trespasser. It was 10 o'clock on Monday morning when the final physical remnants of their fabricated wealth were scheduled to be completely dismantled. The weekend had systematically destroyed their safety nets one by one. They had no access to the trust fund. They had no cash from the fraudulent mortgage application. They had no financial support from Joanne after her new husband uncovered her massive embezzlement. I knew exactly what their next desperate move would be. When cornered criminals run out of digital money and hidden favors, they are forced to liquidate their remaining physical assets. For Carter and Natalie, the only physical assets they still possessed were the two matching luxury sport utility vehicles they had financed just weeks before the wedding. They had purchased those vehicles operating under the absolute delusion that my retirement accounts would eventually cover the massive monthly payments. They had chosen the highest trim levels with custom leather interiors and upgraded entertainment packages. What Carter did not tell my daughter was that he had already missed his very first payment exactly 30 days ago. His personal bank accounts were entirely drained by the offshore sports books long before he ever walked down the aisle. When a buyer defaults on their first payment, the dealership financing department immediately panics. 3 weeks before the wedding ceremony, I received a discreet phone call from the general manager of Westside Luxury Motors. He was a man I had done commercial printing business with for 2 decades. He quietly informed me that my new son-in-law was already in severe default, and the bank was preparing to send repossession agents to secure the cars. Instead of letting the bank take them back then, I made a highly calculated financial decision. I drove down to the dealership and quietly paid the full outstanding balance for both vehicles in cash. I purchased the titles outright under the name of my commercial holding company. The cars legally belonged to me. I simply allowed Carter to keep driving them, knowing I would need a physical trap to close the cage when the time was right. That time was today. I parked my unassuming truck across the street from the dealership showroom and watched the lot through the windshield. Right on schedule, Carter and Natalie pulled into the visitor parking area. They drove the 2 luxury vehicles separately. They both stepped out into the morning sun, looking completely exhausted and deeply panicked. Carter was constantly looking over his shoulder, clearly terrified that his violent creditors were tracking his movements. Natalie looked pale and defeated, clutching her designer handbag like a life preserver. They marched directly into the glass showroom, demanding to speak to the purchasing manager. They wanted to sell the vehicles back to the dealership for an immediate cash buyout to pay off the bookies. I stepped out of my truck and walked slowly across the street. By the time I entered the cool, air-conditioned showroom, the situation was already escalating. Carter was standing at the appraisal desk, loudly demanding that the manager cut him a check for $120,000 immediately. He was aggressively slapping his hands on the glass desk, claiming the cars were in pristine condition, and threatening to take his business to a rival dealership if they did not expedite the cash transfer. The purchasing manager was staring at his computer screen with a deeply confused expression. He typed the vehicle identification numbers into the system again and shook his head. He looked up at Carter and calmly explained that he could not authorize a cash buyout because Carter was not the legal owner of either vehicle. Carter became visibly enraged. He leaned over the desk, his face turning bright red. He shouted that his name was on the original financing paperwork and demanded the manager stop playing games. He screamed that he needed the money today and accused the dealership of trying to scam him out of his equity. I walked up behind them and placed the 2 original corporate titles directly onto the glass desk. I told the manager he could stop looking at the computer screen because the true owner was standing right there. Carter spun around, completely shocked by my sudden appearance. All the aggressive color instantly drained from his face when he recognized the heavy stock paper of the vehicle titles resting on the desk. Natalie covered her mouth with her hand, taking a step backward as the absolute reality of the situation crashed down upon her. I looked directly into Carter's panicked eyes. I explained that when he failed to make his very first payment last month, he forfeited all legal rights to the vehicles. I told him I had purchased the debt portfolio to protect my daughter from being associated with a vehicle repossession right before her wedding. I had allowed them to drive my corporate property for 3 weeks, just to see how long he could maintain his pathetic charade. Now that the charade was completely over, I was formally reclaiming my assets. "You cannot do this," Carter stammered, his voice shaking with absolute terror. "We need the equity from those cars. You know exactly what is going to happen to me if I do not pay those men today. You are sentencing me to death over a car payment." "I am not sentencing you to anything," I replied coldly, keeping my posture perfectly rigid. "Your catastrophic gambling addiction sentenced you. You bet money you did not have and you lost. You tried to use my daughter as a human shield to absorb your financial punishment. These vehicles belong to my printing company, and they are no longer available to fund your criminal debts." Before Carter could formulate another pathetic excuse, the heavy diesel engine of a commercial tow truck roared into the parking lot outside. We all turned to look through the massive glass windows. 2 heavy-duty repossession trucks from a private contractor had just blocked the exit ramps of the dealership. The drivers jumped out and immediately began sliding the heavy steel towing forks underneath the front tires of the 2 luxury vehicles. Carter panicked completely. He sprinted toward the showroom doors, shouting at the tow truck drivers to step away from the cars. He burst out into the parking lot, waving his arms frantically and threatening to call the police if they touched the vehicles. One of the massive tow truck operators, a man easily twice Carter's size, stopped cranking the winch. He looked at Carter with an expression of pure boredom. He calmly reached into his bright yellow vest and pulled out the authorized repossession order I had faxed over an hour ago. He pointed a thick finger at the corporate signature on the bottom line and told Carter that if he interfered with illegal asset recovery, he would personally ensure Carter left the parking lot in the back of a police cruiser. Carter froze entirely. He looked at the massive steel hooks lifting the front wheels of his only remaining escape route off the pavement. The loud metallic clanking of the chains securing the tires sounded like prison doors slamming shut. He had absolutely nothing left to leverage. He had no house, no trust fund, no cash, and now he had no transportation. The violent men he owed money to were undoubtedly expecting their payment by sunset, and he was standing completely empty-handed in a car dealership parking lot. Natalie walked slowly out of the showroom and stood next to me on the sidewalk. She watched in total silence as the tow trucks secured the vehicles and began pulling them out into the street. She did not cry. She did not scream at me. She simply watched the physical manifestation of her ruined marriage being dragged away by heavy machinery. She finally realized that every single thing Carter had promised her was built on stolen money and fraudulent paperwork. I turned to my daughter and told her the bus stop was located exactly 2 blocks down the street. I suggested she use the loose change in her designer handbag to buy a ticket back to whatever cheap motel they were currently hiding in. I did not offer her a ride in my truck. I did not offer her a single word of comfort. I buttoned my suit jacket, walked across the street to my vehicle, and drove away, leaving them standing completely stranded and utterly defenseless against the absolute ruin they had built for themselves. It was Tuesday evening when the digital attack began. Stripped of her luxury vehicles, her trust fund, and her access to my real estate, Natalie was confined to a cheap roadside motel with a man who blamed her for his impending doom. She had absolutely no leverage left in the physical world, so she retreated to the only arena where she still held any currency. She retreated to the internet. She set up her cellular phone in the dimly lit motel room, positioned the camera to capture the peeling wallpaper behind her, and pressed the record button. She did not use filters or bright lighting. She wanted to look as pathetic and destroyed as possible to maximize the public sympathy. She recorded a 7-minute video detailing a masterfully fabricated story of severe financial and emotional abuse. She looked directly into the lens with tears streaming down her face and painted me as a cruel, controlling narcissist who used money as a weapon to enslave her. She told her thousands of followers that I had promised to pay for her dream wedding, but then completely cut her off without warning the day after the ceremony because I was insanely jealous of her new husband. She claimed I had illegally changed the locks on her childhood home, leaving her entirely homeless on the streets. She completely fabricated a story about me bribing a car dealership to steal her vehicles just to punish her for being happy. She did not mention the $69,000 I had already spent on the catering. She deliberately omitted the text message banning me from the rehearsal dinner. She conveniently left out Carter's massive illegal gambling debts, his offshore bookies, and the fact that she had just committed felony wire fraud by forging my signature on a mortgage application. She presented a perfectly curated narrative of a helpless, innocent newlywed crushed by a vindictive billionaire father. She posted the video online, and the internet algorithm immediately recognized the potent combination of tragedy and outrage. The internet absolutely loves a villain, and Natalie had just served them a perfect target on a silver platter. By Wednesday morning, the video had accumulated over 2 million views. It was shared across multiple platforms by strangers who were eager to participate in a public execution. The notification alerts on my tablet began chiming continuously like a fire alarm. The digital mob had mobilized. Anonymous strangers managed to track down the contact information for my commercial printing business. They flooded my company website with hundreds of one-star reviews, claiming the owner was a domestic abuser. My corporate phone lines were completely overwhelmed with hateful voicemails from people wishing that I would die a painful and lonely death. They called me a monster, a tyrant, and a disgrace to fatherhood. My attorney, Russell, called my secure private line in a state of absolute panic. He was speaking rapidly, telling me that the situation was spiraling entirely out of control. He said my commercial clients might start canceling their printing contracts if the negative publicity continued to spread. He strongly urged me to let him draft an immediate press release or record a counter video to defend my reputation. He wanted to release the investigative file proving Carter's gambling addiction to the public right away to stop the absolute bleeding of my character. I sat in my quiet home office sipping my morning coffee and told Russell to do absolutely nothing. I instructed him to remain completely silent and let the hateful messages accumulate. Russell was completely baffled. He asked me why I would voluntarily allow my own daughter to publicly assassinate my character when I held all the documented evidence to destroy her lies. I explained the mechanics of the trap to him using the logic of my printing business. If a machine is printing a flawed document, you do not reach your hand into the moving gears to stop it, because you will only crush your own fingers. You wait until the paper comes out the other side, and then you burn it. The internet is a lawless and chaotic environment. If I responded to her video on social media, it would immediately devolve into a pathetic digital screaming match. The anonymous mob does not care about legal documents or banking ledgers. They only care about drama. If I engaged with her online, I would be stepping into her arena and playing by her rules. I told Russell I was letting her build her fraudulent platform as high as possible, so the fall would be absolutely catastrophic. A social media video is just background noise, but if we waited patiently, she would inevitably make a fatal mistake driven by her own greed. By Wednesday afternoon, my prediction proved entirely correct. Intoxicated by the massive outpouring of public sympathy and likely pressured by Carter, who desperately needed cash to pay his violent creditors, Natalie escalated her campaign. She linked a digital crowdfunding account to her viral video. She begged her viewers to donate money to a legal defense and survival fund to help her and her husband secure a new apartment and hire lawyers to fight my supposed abuse. The money began pouring in immediately. Thousands of sympathetic strangers began donating $5, $10, and $20 at a time. She had just crossed a massive legal boundary. She was no longer just complaining on the internet. She was actively using a fabricated story to solicit financial donations across state lines. She had elevated her temper tantrum into federal wire fraud. The bait was officially set, and on Thursday morning, the final piece of the trap snapped perfectly into place. A producer from the local television affiliate, Channel 6 Action News, reached out to Natalie. The news station had seen the viral video and the massive public engagement. They smelled a lucrative human interest story. They wanted to interview the abused daughter live on the evening broadcast. Natalie was absolutely thrilled. She publicly accepted the invitation on her social media profile, bragging that the entire city was finally going to hear her absolute truth. She stated that the news crew was sending a van to her motel parking lot to broadcast her interview live at 6 o'clock that evening. She truly believed she had won the war. She thought she had successfully manipulated the public and the media into forcing me to surrender my wealth to stop the total humiliation. I watched her confirmation post load on my screen. A cold, satisfied smile spread across my face. I picked up my phone and dialed Russell. I told him the waiting period was officially over. The target had voluntarily moved from a chaotic digital space where lies are protected as free speech into a highly regulated traditional broadcasting network where defamation carries massive financial penalties. I instructed Russell to gather the unredacted offshore gambling ledgers, the commercial lien documents, and the time-stamped federal banking logs regarding the forged mortgage application. I told him to put every single piece of undeniable proof into a single briefcase and meet me at the television studio headquarters downtown. We were not going to argue with strangers on the internet. We were going to walk directly into the executive producer's office an hour before the live broadcast and completely detonate her entire reality on live television. I walked into the polished glass lobby of Channel 6 Action News at exactly 5 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. Russell was right beside me carrying a heavy black leather briefcase that contained the absolute destruction of my daughter's fabricated reality. The receptionist tried to stop us, claiming we needed an appointment, but Russell simply handed her a sealed envelope containing a formal legal notice of impending defamation litigation. He instructed her to hand it to the executive producer immediately. Within 3 minutes, a nervous-looking station manager was escorting us up the elevator and into the main control room overlooking the active studio floor. The executive producer was a sharply dressed woman who looked extremely annoyed by our sudden interruption. She was holding a clipboard and staring at a wall of glowing monitors where the live feed of Natalie sitting in the motel parking lot was already queued up for the 6 o'clock evening broadcast. She demanded to know why we were threatening her news station with a lawsuit mere minutes before they went to air. I did not raise my voice. I simply told her that if she allowed my daughter to broadcast her fabricated story of abuse on a regulated television network, her parent company would be held legally and financially liable for massive corporate defamation. Russell placed the leather briefcase onto the conference table and snapped the locks open. He did not give a long speech. He just started laying the authenticated documents across the table one by one. He presented the federal banking logs, confirming Natalie was currently under active federal investigation for forging my signature on a mortgage application. He laid down the commercial lien records, proving the luxury vehicles were repossessed because they were legally owned by my company and the payments had defaulted. He presented the thick forensic ledger detailing Carter's massive illegal offshore gambling debts. Finally, Russell pulled out a digital audio player. He explained that my front porch was equipped with high-definition security cameras that captured every single word spoken during the driveway ambush. He pressed the play button. The crystal-clear audio of Natalie begging me to pay off violent loan sharks filled the small control room. The producer heard her admit that Carter lied to her. She heard Carter explicitly admit he only married her for my money and that he blamed her for failing to manipulate me. The producer listened in absolute stunned silence as the entire foundation of the viral abuse story completely crumbled into dust. She looked at the documents and then looked up at the live feed of Natalie, dabbing fake tears from her eyes on the monitor. The producer realized instantly that she had been completely conned. She had almost allowed her network to be used as a tool to solicit fraudulent donations for a federal suspect. But she was also a veteran television producer. She knew that exposing a viral scam artist live on the air was a significantly bigger rating draw than a standard human interest sob story. The producer picked up her headset and spoke directly into the earpiece of the lead news anchor sitting at the broadcast desk downstairs. She told him they were changing the entire script. She instructed the technical directors to digitize the porch audio recording and load the offshore gambling ledger onto the main broadcasting screen. She looked at me and nodded, confirming the trap was officially set. At exactly 6 o'clock, the evening news broadcast began. Millions of viewers across the city tuned in to see the poor, abused daughter they had been rallying behind on the internet all week. The split screen showed the polished news anchor in the studio, and Natalie sitting outside her cheap motel looking perfectly fragile and heartbroken. The anchor started the interview by asking her to summarize the claims she made in her viral video. Natalie immediately launched into her rehearsed performance. She cried on cue, claiming I had maliciously locked her out of her home and stolen her vehicles purely out of spite. She looked directly into the camera and begged the community to donate to her legal fund so she could escape my terrifying financial abuse. She delivered the lines perfectly, expecting the anchor to offer his deep condolences and wrap up the segment. Instead, the anchor paused. His expression shifted from sympathetic to completely stern. He looked directly into the camera and stated that the news station had just received exclusive authenticated documents regarding her situation. He informed Natalie and the entire viewing public that the vehicles were actually repossessed by a commercial lender due to severe financial default. Natalie froze. Her fake tears instantly stopped falling. She stammered, trying to interrupt, but the anchor simply continued. He projected the offshore gambling ledger onto the screen for the entire city to see. He read the numbers out loud, exposing the $180,000 owed to illegal bookmakers in Costa Rica. He then informed the audience that Natalie was currently being investigated by federal banking authorities for felony wire fraud. The color completely drained from Natalie's face. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a massive speeding truck. She stuttered out a pathetic denial, claiming the documents were entirely fake and that I had manufactured them to ruin her. The anchor did not argue with her. He simply looked down at his desk and stated that the station had acquired security audio from 2 days ago. The technical director pressed a button, and the porch recording played loudly over the live television broadcast. The entire city heard Natalie begging me to pay off the violent loan sharks. They heard Carter admit his entire marriage was a financial scam. The undeniable truth echoed across millions of living rooms, entirely destroying her carefully crafted victim narrative in a matter of seconds. Natalie reached forward and aggressively slapped the camera away, causing the live feed to violently shake and cut to black. The anchor calmly looked back at the studio audience and moved on to the next weather segment, leaving the smoking crater of her public image behind. The internet reaction was instantaneous and absolutely ruthless. The digital mob that had blindly supported her just hours ago immediately turned against her with terrifying ferocity. The viral video comments shifted from overwhelming sympathy to pure, concentrated hatred. The public realized they had been manipulated into donating money to a scam artist who was trying to bail out a degenerate gambler. The crowdfunding platform automatically flagged her account for fraudulent solicitation, locked the funds, and initiated mass refunds to the donors. Her social media pages were absolutely flooded with angry citizens demanding she be arrested for wire fraud. The final consequence arrived less than 20 minutes after the broadcast ended. Natalie worked as a senior account manager for a prestigious public relations firm downtown. Her entire career was built on managing the public image of wealthy corporate clients. Her firm relied entirely on credibility and trust. Her boss had been watching the evening news from his home. He saw his own employee exposed as a fraudulent, manipulative liar and a federal suspect on live television. Before Natalie could even pack her bags to flee the motel, her cellular phone rang. It was the senior partner of her public relations firm. He did not ask for her side of the story. He did not offer her a chance to explain or resign gracefully. He coldly informed her that her employment was terminated effectively immediately due to a catastrophic violation of the company morals clause. He told her a courier would be delivering her personal desk items in a cardboard box the next morning, and strongly advised her never to use him as a professional reference. In less than 30 minutes, my daughter had lost the public sympathy she craved, the crowdfunding money she desperately needed, and the only legitimate career she had ever built. She had tried to use the court of public opinion to publicly execute me, but I had simply handed the executioner her actual resume. The defamation nuke had successfully detonated, and there was absolutely nothing left of her world but radioactive ash. The cellular phone slipped from Natalie's trembling fingers and dropped onto the stained carpet of the motel room floor. The line was completely dead. Her prestigious public relations firm had just severed all professional ties with her. The small room became suffocatingly quiet, except for the low hum of the broken air conditioning unit in the window. The television was still broadcasting the local news, but the volume was muted. Natalie sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, staring blankly at the wall, as the absolute reality of her situation began to crush the breath out of her lungs. She had lost her career, her public reputation, and her dignity in a matter of 20 minutes. Carter did not walk over to hold her. He did not offer a single word of comfort to the woman who had just sacrificed her entire life to protect him. Instead, he walked directly to the cheap wooden closet and pulled out his canvas duffel bag. He began grabbing his clothes off the wire hangers and throwing them into the bag with frantic and calculated efficiency. Natalie blinked her eyes slowly, trying to process his sudden movement. She asked him what he was doing in a voice so weak it barely carried across the small room. Carter did not stop packing. He kept his back to her and explained that the local television broadcast had just painted a massive neon target directly on his chest. The news anchor had explicitly stated his full name and the exact dollar amount he owed to his violent offshore creditors. He told her the bookies were absolutely watching the broadcast, and they now knew exactly what city he was hiding in. Without the luxury cars to leverage and without access to my retirement accounts, he had no way to pay them. He coldly informed her that he was not going to sit in a cheap motel room waiting to have his legs broken over a completely failed financial scam. He was leaving immediately. Natalie stumbled to her feet, her face pale and streaked with dried mascara. She begged him not to abandon her. She reminded him that they were legally married and that they were supposed to be a team. She told him she had alienated her father and destroyed her own life specifically to help him survive. Carter laughed, a harsh and unforgiving sound that echoed terribly in the enclosed space. He reached into the front pocket of his duffel bag and pulled out a folded legal document. He tossed it onto the bed next to her. He explained that it was a formal petition for an absolute annulment of their marriage. He told her he had visited a cheap legal clinic earlier that morning while she was busy setting up her fraudulent crowdfunding account. The grounds for the annulment were profoundly ironic. He was legally dissolving the marriage based on the premise of financial fraud. He claimed she had actively deceived him about her personal wealth and her access to my corporate assets. By filing for a legal annulment instead of a standard divorce, he was erasing the marriage entirely from the public record. He was completely severing all civil ties to her, and more importantly, he was legally isolating himself from the massive federal wire fraud charges she was about to face. He told her she was no longer his wife, and her legal problems were no longer his concern. Natalie reached out and grabbed his arm, pleading with him to stay. Carter aggressively swatted her hand away, pushing her back onto the mattress. He zipped his duffel bag shut and walked over to the small desk where Natalie had left her expensive designer handbag. He opened the main compartment without asking and pulled out her leather wallet. He removed the remaining $200 in emergency cash she had withdrawn earlier that week. He also took the heavy gold watch I had given her for her college graduation. He slipped the cash and the jewelry into his pocket, telling her he needed the funds to buy a bus ticket across the state line before midnight. He slung the heavy bag over his shoulder and walked to the door. He did not look back. He did not say goodbye or offer a final apology. He simply opened the door, stepped out into the humid night air, and vanished into the darkness. He abandoned her exactly the same way he abandoned his previous financial obligations. Natalie was left completely alone. She had no husband, no father, no job, no vehicles, and absolutely no money. She sat on the stained mattress as the night slowly dragged on. She picked up her phone and tried to call her mother, but the line was completely disconnected. Wallace had already frozen Joanne's accounts and confiscated her devices. Natalie tried to call her college friends, but they had all seen the viral news broadcast and preemptively blocked her number. She was entirely isolated in a digital and physical prison of her own making. The sun eventually rose, casting long, harsh shadows through the cheap plastic blinds of the motel window. Natalie had not slept for a single second. She knew the motel manager would be arriving soon to demand a credit card for another night, and she knew every single card in her wallet would be declined. She slowly began to gather her scattered designer clothes, attempting to pack them back into her heavy suitcases. She did not know where she was going to go or how she was going to survive the day. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, a heavy and authoritative knock echoed against the wooden door. It was not the motel manager demanding a daily payment. It was a rhythmic and demanding sound that instantly sent a cold shiver down Natalie's spine. She walked slowly to the door and peered through the small glass peephole. 3 men wearing dark windbreakers were standing on the exterior walkway. The bold yellow letters on the back of their jackets clearly identified them as federal agents. The banking authorities had not wasted any time. Once the local news broadcast publicly aired the undeniable proof of her crimes, the federal investigators were forced to act immediately to secure their primary suspect before she could flee the jurisdiction. Natalie unlocked the door with a trembling hand. The lead agent stepped forward and asked her to confirm her legal identity. She nodded her head, her voice completely failing her. The agent unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. He instructed her to turn around and place her hands behind her back. He spoke with absolute professional detachment, informing her that she was under formal arrest for felony forgery wire fraud and attempted bank fraud. He read her the Miranda rights as the cold metal rings snapped tightly around her wrists. The sharp clicking sound of the locking mechanism finalized her absolute destruction. The agents did not let her grab her designer luggage or her expensive cosmetics. They simply turned her around and marched her out of the motel room exactly as she was. The other motel guests stepped out of their rooms to watch the spectacle. Natalie was forced to walk the long, humiliating distance across the cracked asphalt parking lot in front of an audience of complete strangers. She was no longer a wealthy heiress or a powerful public relations manager. She was just another criminal being loaded into the back of a dark federal vehicle. The heavy doors slammed shut, enclosing her in total darkness. As the vehicle drove away from the motel, she finally understood the absolute, terrifying truth. I had not destroyed her life. I had simply stepped out of her way and allowed her to completely destroy herself. It was Friday morning, and a heavy gray rain was washing the city streets clean. I sat in the back corner booth of my favorite local diner, a place I had been visiting every single week for the past 15 years. The vinyl seats were cracked, and the coffee was always slightly bitter, but it was quiet. I sat looking out the wet window, watching the traffic pass by. The waitress walked over and filled my ceramic mug without asking. She knew I liked to be left alone with my thoughts. The chaos of the past week was finally settling into a cold and permanent reality. I had successfully protected my assets and dismantled a predatory marriage. Now there was only the aftermath left to manage. The small bell above the diner entrance chimed sharply, cutting through the low murmur of the morning crowd. I did not turn my head immediately, but I saw her reflection in the wet glass of the window. Natalie walked through the double doors. She did not look like a prestigious public relations executive, and she certainly did not look like a wealthy young bride. She looked entirely broken. She was wearing a pair of oversized gray sweatpants and a faded hooded sweatshirt that she had likely borrowed from a donation bin at the county jail. Her hair was matted and wet from the rain. Her face was completely devoid of makeup, revealing dark, heavy circles under her swollen eyes. She had spent the last 24 hours sitting in a concrete federal holding cell, and the terrifying reality of the criminal justice system had physically aged her. She scanned the room, spotted me sitting in the back booth, and walked slowly toward my table. She moved with a heavy, sluggish hesitation, as if her shoes were made of lead. She slid into the vinyl seat across from me, pulling the wet hood down from her head. The smell of cheap industrial soap and stale institutional coffee lingered heavily on her clothes. She did not say good morning. She did not ask how I was doing. She simply placed her hands flat on the sticky Formica table and looked down at her fingers. I noticed immediately that her expensive diamond engagement ring and her platinum wedding band were completely gone. I did not ask if she had pawned them for emergency cash, or if they had been confiscated as evidence. It simply did not matter anymore. I stood in front of a federal magistrate judge at 3 o'clock this morning. Natalie whispered, her voice hoarse and completely devoid of its usual arrogant confidence. They released me on a personal recognizance bond because I have no prior criminal record, but they took my passport. They told me I am facing a maximum of 5 years in a federal penitentiary for attempting to forge a mortgage document across state banking lines. I took a slow sip of my bitter black coffee and set the mug back down on the saucer. I did not offer her a napkin to dry her face. I did not reach across the table to hold her trembling hands. I simply looked at her and waited for the inevitable request. "I need $50,000, Dad," she pleaded, finally looking up to meet my eyes. The tears began to pool in the corners of her eyes, mixing with the rainwater on her cheeks. I called 3 different federal defense attorneys this morning using the payphone in the lobby of the courthouse. They all told me they require a minimum retainer of $50,000 just to take my case and begin reviewing the evidence. I have absolutely nothing left. My bank accounts are completely frozen. My firm fired me and they are threatening to sue me to recover the corporate laptop the federal agents confiscated. Carter is completely gone. I slept on a plastic bench last night. I am begging you to please wire the money to the lawyers and let me come home. I just need to sleep in my old bedroom. I promise I will change everything. I listened to her desperate pleas while the rain continued to beat heavily against the diner window. She was playing the absolute final card she had left in her deck. She was trying to weaponize my paternal instinct. She wanted me to look at her pathetic state and feel a sudden, overwhelming wave of guilt and protection. She expected the sight of her in cheap jail clothes to break my resolve and force me to open my checkbook to rescue her from the consequences of her own actions. I leaned back against the cracked vinyl seat and crossed my arms. "You are not coming back to my house," I stated, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any anger or warmth. "You surrendered your key and your bedroom the night you sent me that text message banning me from your rehearsal dinner. You made it explicitly clear that you were an independent adult starting a new high society life. You established the boundaries of our relationship. I am simply enforcing them." "But Carter manipulated me," she cried, her voice rising slightly, drawing a brief look from a man sitting at the counter. "Carter lied to me about his money and his debts. He used me as a pawn. You know he is a criminal. You cannot let me go to federal prison for a mistake I made while I was under extreme emotional distress." I shook my head slowly, cutting off her pathetic string of excuses. "Carter did not manipulate you into walking into a coffee shop, connecting to a public internet network, and flawlessly tracing my signature onto a fraudulent power of attorney document. Carter did not force you to submit a massive commercial loan application to steal my debt-free property. You made those deliberate choices completely on your own because you firmly believed you were legally untouchable. You thought your status as my daughter made you immune to the laws of the real world. You are currently learning that the real world does not care about your last name." I reached into the inside breast pocket of my charcoal suit jacket. Natalie sat up slightly, a brief flash of desperate hope illuminating her tired eyes. She genuinely thought I was reaching for my leather checkbook. She truly believed that after all the harsh words, I was finally going to write the $50,000 retainer to save her. I did not pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a single printed piece of paper and a small white business card. I slid them across the sticky Formica table, stopping right in front of her trembling hands. Natalie looked down at the items in total confusion. She picked up the small white card first. It was a standard contact card for the county public defender's office downtown. She dropped it back onto the table as if it had burned her fingers. Then she looked at the printed piece of paper. It was a standard employment application for a daytime cashier positions at the local hardware store located 3 blocks away from the diner. "What is this?" she asked, staring at the application with an expression of pure disgust. "That is your new reality," I explained, keeping my tone entirely conversational. "You do not get a $50,000 private defense attorney funded by the retirement accounts you actively tried to steal. You get a court-appointed public defender who is severely overworked and underpaid. You are going to take that business card, call their office, and wait in line with everyone else. And since you need to pay for a cheap apartment and buy your own groceries while you wait for your federal trial, you are going to need an income. The hardware store is hiring immediately, and they do not require a corporate public relations background." Natalie stared at the job application, her breathing becoming heavy and erratic. "I cannot work at a hardware store," she whispered, her pride temporarily overriding her sheer desperation. "I have a master's degree in communications. I manage million-dollar accounts. The people in this town know who I am. I cannot stand behind a cash register wearing an apron." "You do not have a master's degree anymore," I corrected her ruthlessly. "You have a pending federal felony charge. Nobody in the corporate world will ever hire you to manage their money or their public image ever again. Pride is a luxury reserved exclusively for people who have clean criminal records and full bank accounts. You currently possess neither of those things. I strongly suggest you fill out that application before someone else takes the job and you are left completely starving on the street." She looked at me with absolute sheer terror. She finally realized that the bridge between us was not just burned, it had been completely pulverized into dust. There was no secret safety net. There was no hidden reservoir of parental forgiveness waiting to catch her at the absolute bottom. I was looking at her not as a father looking at his precious daughter, but as a man looking at a convicted fraudster. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a crisp $5 bill, and placed it on the table to cover the cost of my black coffee. I did not say goodbye. I did not wish her luck with her federal indictment. I simply slid out of the diner booth, stood up, and walked toward the exit. I pushed the heavy glass doors open and stepped out into the cold morning rain. I walked to my truck, unlocked the door, and started the engine. I drove away from the diner, leaving her sitting completely alone in the back booth, staring blankly at a minimum wage job application and the absolute ruins of her own terrible choices. 6 months have passed since the heavy rainstorm washed the city streets clean. It is a bright and remarkably clear Saturday morning in late May. I am sitting in the worn wooden bleachers of the County Vocational and Technical College auditorium. The enclosed air smells heavily of floor wax and the faint, lingering scent of industrial machine oil. The large room is filled with hundreds of folding metal chairs occupied by proud working-class parents holding cheap paper programs. There are no imported truffled floral arrangements here. There are no private VIP rooms reserved for wealthy real estate developers. The people sitting all around me are wearing heavily washed denim and scuffed steel toe boots. They took the morning off from their grueling factory shifts and active construction sites to watch their children achieve something incredibly real. The $69,000 was fully returned to my commercial printing company accounts exactly 4 months ago. My attorney Russell executed the commercial mechanics lien with absolute legal precision. The luxury sport utility vehicles were seized by the primary auto lender and immediately liquidated at a massive commercial auction. The dealership financing department was legally forced to settle the breach of contract lawsuit before they could clear the vehicle titles for public resale. The money was wired back into my personal possession, down to the absolute last cent. I did not move the recovered funds back into my personal retirement portfolio. The money had already been completely written off in my mind as a total loss, so I decided to invest it into something that would actually generate a massive human return. I established the Sullivan Commercial Industrial Grant. I walked into the financial aid office of this vocational college and handed the director a certified bank draft for the entire $69,000. I established very strict criteria for the recipients. The grant was not based on high school popularity or family legacy admissions. It was designed exclusively for students who came from absolute poverty, who had demonstrated exceptional mechanical aptitude, and who were actively working full-time minimum wage jobs while attending their evening classes. The private fund was large enough to entirely cover the 2-year tuition, the heavy industrial toolkits, and the state certification examination fees for 5 young men and women. The graduation march begins playing through the slightly distorted public address system mounted on the concrete walls. The heavy wooden double doors at the back of the auditorium swing open wide. A long line of 60 graduating students begins walking down the center aisle. They are wearing traditional cheap blue caps and gowns, but underneath the thin polyester fabric, I can see the thick collars of their brand new mechanic uniforms. I scan the moving line and easily spot the 5 specific students whose financial hardship files I personally reviewed. I watch a young man named David walk confidently across the stage. According to his application essay, he spent the last 3 years living in his rusted sedan, working overnight shifts at a local warehouse just to pay for his sick mother's heart medication. When the college dean calls his name and hands him his Master Automotive Diagnostic certification, David stops right in the middle of the stage. He points directly into the crowded wooden bleachers. An older woman sitting 3 rows ahead of me stands up, leaning heavily on a wooden medical cane. She is crying uncontrollably. Her tears are not the calculated, manipulative tears of a spoiled child trying to solicit fraudulent internet donations. They are the genuine heavy tears of a mother who knows her son just permanently broke their generational cycle of absolute poverty. Next, a young woman named Maria crosses the wooden platform. She is receiving her advanced diesel mechanic certification. She had been rejected for traditional student loans because her parents had terrible credit scores and zero physical collateral. She had almost dropped out of the difficult program twice because she could not afford the mandatory heavy-duty tool sets required for the final practical examinations. The grant I established purchased those expensive tools directly from the manufacturer and delivered them to her. As she accepts her heavy paper diploma, she raises it high above her head, letting out a loud and joyful shout. Her younger brothers and sisters erupt into massive cheers from the back row, jumping up and down with pure, unadulterated pride. I sit quietly in the bleachers watching these genuine moments unfold one after another. I did not ask the college administrative board to put my name on the printed graduation program. I did not ask to sit on the decorated stage or give a long-winded speech about my personal generosity. I am completely invisible in this crowded room, and that is exactly how I want it to be. I am experiencing the exact feeling of profound satisfaction that I had originally hoped to feel on the day of my daughter's expensive wedding. The fundamental difference is that I am no longer funding a massive theatrical illusion designed to impress wealthy country club strangers. I am funding the actual permanent survival of young adults who understand the brutal value of a hard-earned dollar. The formal ceremony concludes with the traditional tossing of the blue caps high into the air. The large auditorium erupts into a chaotic and beautiful mess of hugging families and flashing cameras. I stand up and slowly make my way down the wooden bleachers. I navigate carefully through the dense crowd of celebrating families, making sure not to interrupt their private moments of absolute joy. I step out through the heavy glass doors into the bright midday sun. The warm air feels incredibly clean against my face. I reach into my front pocket and pull out my cellular phone to check the time. The digital screen lights up, displaying a single missed call notification. The caller identification clearly indicates the incoming call originated from a federal correctional facility located 2 states away. The federal banking authorities did not offer my daughter a lenient plea deal. The local prosecutor wanted to make a severe public example out of her viral internet fraud case. She is currently serving her mandatory felony sentence entirely alone. I stare at the glowing notification on the glass screen. 1 year ago, the sight of a missed call from my only child would have sent me into a blind panic. I would have dropped absolutely everything to return the call and solve whatever minor inconvenience was ruining her afternoon. Today, I do not feel a single trace of anxiety. I do not feel any lingering guilt or parental obligation. The absolute quiet inside my chest is profound and entirely unshakable. I press my thumb against the side button of the device. I do not just silence the ringer. I power the phone down completely. The screen turns black, severing the final digital tether to a past life that no longer exists. I walk across the hot asphalt parking lot toward my reliable old truck. I unlock the heavy metal door, slide into the familiar driver's seat, and insert the key into the ignition. The engine roars to life with a steady and comforting hum. I put the truck into gear and pull out of the parking lot, merging safely onto the main road, heading back toward my quiet, empty house. I am 70 years old. I am entirely alone, and for the very first time in my entire life, I am absolutely at peace. The greatest lesson we can extract from this tragedy is that true family is built entirely on mutual respect and absolute accountability, not just shared blood. When you allow entitled people to treat you like a disposable financial resource, you are not showing them unconditional love. You are simply funding your own eventual destruction. Setting unbreakable boundaries is never an act of cruelty, but a necessary act of profound self-preservation. You must never set yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. True peace only arrives when you finally stop financing the people who secretly despise you. If you believe that respect must always be earned and never blindly inherited, please share this story and subscribe for more lessons on survival.